Hello there, and welcome to the next episode of the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 modding tutorial series. This episode is going to be going over the very basics of working with models for the game, how to use the plugin for Blender, how to kind of get a model from the game, put it into the Blender, make some changes, kind of the key terms and model types, that kind of stuff, and then how to eventually get them back into game, having made some changes to them. This is going to be very basic, but it's the main emphasis to put on it is this will assume you have some level of knowledge of Blender, its basic interaction in the UIs, how to do some basic modeling stuff. If you don't necessarily know how to do modeling at this stage, then the best thing to do is just go look at sort of general Blender tutorials on YouTube, learn those basics. Just I don't go over those again because there is so many resources online about that kind of stuff, so I'm just going to focus on the key bits here around actually getting them model from the game, making changes, putting it back in, and the specifics to relate to this game rather than Blender as an overall piece. But as long as you understand that, then I think we jump straight into it. I'm just going to change over to my Blender. So to get started with changing any model in the game, first thing you need to do is get the file from the game, and there's two ways we can do this depending on the file type you're working with. But the first thing, the best way to quickest way to find something really would be if you're in Blender with the plugin installed, if you press N on your keyboard and bring up the Kingdom Come 2 toolkit panel over here on the right, you have the option to either import a file from the pack, so the base game pack files, or you can import a loose file, so just a file you've extracted yourself already somewhere from the pack files. Either of them functionally they work the same in terms of the ultimate import. The only difference is the pack version will save you time. If you're going to look for a file, you can just type in on one of these options, search for the name of what you think it might be called, and it'll give you a list of the types of the search results it's found essentially, and extract it for you. So it saves you having to manually take it from the pack file. Whereas if you do the loose file option, you have to have found it in the pack first, put it in a folder somewhere, and then obviously point it here to where it's going to be. I'll show you through both options in full detail so you can kind of get an idea of how to do them. We'll start with pack just because that's the easiest version of it. The main thing is make sure you've done the stuff I showed in the first video in terms of on your preferences. If I go to KCD2, you need to have in your preferences the data directory set. If you don't have this set, these will not work because it uses this as the reference point where it's looking for these pack files. Just make sure you've done that bit first, and also make sure you've got a texture path set for where you want texture coming out, because I'll be showing you as well getting the textures from the game as you're getting the model. So once you've got that sorted, you can go to these buttons to start an import. The one you need to click on will depend on what you're working with. So the first option, the skin, for the most part, this is used for character models, so the body, the heads, that kind of stuff. And it's also used for stuff they wear, so the clothing, armor, all those kind of pieces. Anything generally associated with character tends to fit as a skin file, whereas CGF tends to be more collision-based stuff, so shields, weapons, props, buildings, anything like that that doesn't fit under kind of character specifics should be a CGF. And then a model, a material file even, is a file that just tells the game where to find the textures, essentially. So what I'm going to do to start off with, I'm going to pick up first a skin. I'll show CGF separately afterwards, but to start off with, I'll click on here for the import skin from pack. What it's going to do, it takes a couple seconds sometimes, but essentially it scans all the pack files, it returns an entire list of all the options, and you have two options. You can either do a search here at the top, or you click on the drop down, which could take a long time to load depending on your PC's hard drive or SSD. And you could just go through this list, you could pick something out, but if you have a rough idea of what you're looking for, try to start with a search term up here first. So for my example, what I'm going to do is, let's say you want to look for what Henry has. So I know from context, Henry has his head as a separate piece here, but he uses a generic male body. So for now, I'm just going to import Henry's head so you can kind of see what that looks like as a process. So pop in Henry, I've picked the option I want from the drop down in here, picked his head, and I'm going to click OK on that option. Okay, so what it'll do when it starts off is turn your camera so you can see it face forward like this. But you can see now I've got, in principle, the model of Henry's head here, and you can see it will import all the armature, bones, that kind of stuff to go with it, so you've got the full structure to work with. If you want to kind of remap bones, or if you want to weight them or replace a model, you've got the bones to do that with. Yeah, so that's his head as a starting point. So when you first import it by default, you won't have any materials. Like if I go to material view now, give it a second to load, but it won't actually find the materials when it tries to do so. So you can see now it's just gone black. It just doesn't know what the hell it's doing because it hasn't got the textures there. So you don't actually need them if you're just doing modeling stuff. You can just stick to the viewport shading. But if you actually want to see the materials kind of as a visual reference, or if you kind of want to change them afterwards, what we can do is you go to the import material option, and we can find the material for Henry's head and import it, and I can ask it to bring the textures with it, essentially. So if I go to import material, see the same thing of just search for Henry, press enter. There'll be a load of options, but you can see in here somewhere Henry's head should be in here somewhere. So Henry head, and there's a couple of different versions to go. It depends on, some of them are named differently, they're not that consistent. But for the sake of this one, I'm trying to go with Henry head MO1 for this. I'm going to select that. And then the important thing, you actually want the textures to come with the material file structure, then you want to tick this import texture option. What this will do when you click OK, a couple seconds, and it'll try to get the textures from the pack file, convert them for you using the same methods we've shown on the last video about texture conversion, and then try to put them in Blender so you can see them. So I'm just going to have that ticked, click OK, give that a second to do its thing. Can take a bit of a while sometimes, depending on how many it's trying to bring in. But now, in theory, I go to the viewport shading option for material, and there you go. You can now see I've got Henry's texture, and then I'm just going to hide the armature. Ignore his goth eyebrows, but you can see there we've now got his full textures in here. And if I go to the material tab, it should now show the full list. So you can see in here it's brought in textures. These ones aren't used in this set, so you can ignore those, but the key ones we want to change in terms of Henry's actual body, etc., they've imported. It will set up the structure in the same order the game material file was, so you'll start with 0 to however many slots they had if it's a multi-material option. So you've got all those exactly as they were in the game to work with. And then you obviously can go ahead and make whatever changes you want, and you can export it, or you can do it your own custom item. It depends what it is you're trying to achieve, but obviously that's the basics of getting a skin file in here. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to open up another copy of Blender, and I'll show you the same with CGF, and then I'll export both afterwards and show you how you do that process. So I'm just going to go in again, same process. I'm going to click on Toolkit option over here. CGF, I'm going to click on to the import CGF option, and we can pick anything of a CGF as an example to work with. The one I'm going to take, just because one I know quite often working on my own swords, I'm going to look for Henry's sword that you get later on in the game. So the one that obviously is originally the sword your father makes in the game, that's the sword you want the mod story's based around. I'm going to take that and try to modify it. So what you're looking for is this particular one here is long_sword_Henry.cgf. That's the particular one we're looking for, and you can see from hovering over it also tells you which pack it's in for finally tells afterwards. So I'm going to pick that option. There is damaged versions and lots of stuff, we don't know about those just yet. But now I'm just going to pick longsword Henry, click OK, and it's going to import it. Just the same thing as the skin files in the sense that it doesn't have the material textures with it yet. But you can see the sword is there, and in the structure here on the right, you can see it's created a load of like different pieces here that we need to talk about as well. So essentially, these ones here are what I'd call like sort of helpers or memory points. If you don't work with armor, like that's kind of the equivalent of what they are. They're essentially just points and empties that tell the game where to do certain things, essentially. So on this particular case over here, SLT 0 is the placement of player's first hand, so usually left hand, and the SLT 1 should be the right hand and where they're placed. So between them, that would be, you can see from those two pieces you've got here, if I put on movement there. So you've got one here, one there. So for a two-handed weapon, you should always have two of these. If it's a one-handed weapon, you'll only see the one, which should be SLT_0. And then there's various other bits across here. So sharpening center speaks for itself, really. That's just the point the game looks for when you're sharpening a sword, to see where it starts the center from for the minigame, essentially. There's then various other bits across here. So this PCK IR_0 and 1 essentially are just like, when you look at a sword that's on the ground or item on the ground, when you look at it and the text appears with the name of it and like the stats for it, that's where it decides where it puts these. So the first one, the default one, obviously based on the handle you look at there, that's when the text will appear, and then the second one will show up over here instead, basically. That's all they're used for, essentially. There's not masses to them. And then the other two here, depending on the type of weapon you look at, but swords generally you'll see two of these, is the physics proxies modules. Essentially, these are the ones that tell the game how the collision should work for the weapon. It's a bit of a weird one in the way they're structured. So for swords, what you'll tend to see is two of them, generally. So the first one should be covering the full blade of the sword across the thing. Then the second should be essentially for the handguard across like this. At the moment, with the version of the Blender plugin we're currently working with, it doesn't actually make the proxy, so they should have an actual like visual box to display, but at the moment we haven't got that data out of the game, which we're trying to work on. But for now, it gives you kind of the starting point of the names, and we have to recreate them, which I'll show you. We'll go to export in a bit. But yeah, so that's what they are. They're the proxies for the collision of how the swords handle when they hit each other, where they does or doesn't count as a hit, essentially. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and go to import material to try to import the textures for this. Again, just visual things. You can see how to do that and play around with it in Blender. Not essential for your process of actually getting it back into the game. So go Henry, and then look on long underscore sword underscore Henry MTL. I'm going to tick the option to import the textures. I'm going to click OK. Before I do, to make sure you context that you have the sword itself selected rather than any of the MPs we're messing around with. But we've done that. I'll put that in, click OK. And then just as previous, give it a few seconds to do its job. It's just going to put all the textures it needs, try to convert them. And then when it is done now, I should go to material view, which might take a second, but there you are. Now you can see it now has all the textures in the game. So you can see some things like the decals, they'll come in without the transparency, but you get the idea of what it is they are. So you can see that's the engraving to the middle of the sword. That's the maker's mark on there on both sides. And then obviously all the rest of it, you can see it's all in there. Same as the previous one, you can go to material view, and it will import them in the same way. So you can see, in this particular case, the first one's a proxy, so won't have anything on the first material there and as such. But then the rest of them should see now which texture it's trying to use in there. You can play around with those. So I give this context to the last one here. Go and just edit mode to show you kind of how you can see them select that. And you can see it's just the maker's mark at the bottom here that's option 4, and I think option 3 is nothing really. 2 then, I think, yeah, 2 is the this of a decal up there. So you can kind of get an idea, and visually, at least for me, it helps to kind of get an idea of how the materials are structured and see them properly in Blender in practice. You can lay everything out properly and then mentally convert that on your end when you're exporting back to an MTL file. Just visually a bit easier to lay it out like that. Yeah, so that's you import it, you got the textures working. So what I'm going to do for both of these now is just sort of make some small changes to both of them so that you can see visual difference when you import it back into game and show you that it actually has worked as a change. So to do that, we'll go back over first to Henry's head, and all we're going to do for a change for this, I'm going to kind of make his head a bit of an odd shape in some sort of way so you kind of get an idea of what that looks like, an easy way to tell that in game. So to do that, with his head selected, all I'm going to do, I'm going to go into sculpt mode, and I'm going to make some ridiculous sort of looking shape out of him, to be honest. See what turns out. Blob, and the size a bit, and I'm just going to give him a bit of a weird bump on his head, so you can see that that'd be easy to see in game that that's worked. The only concept is his hair might be in the way, so I'm just going to kind of do the same for his ears. Just, I know it's going to be ridiculous, but just so you can tell it has worked. So that's a quick change there. Go back to object mode so you can see that that's working. And you can see now Henry is looking beautiful. Okay, so all we're going to do now is export this and then get it ready to go out to game. So the main thing is, it should import this correct way when you import it, so you should just make sure you have this structure here. So as long as it's in a correct export node in here, then a collection for whatever your model name is. It takes this name as the file name it will generate at the end. Then it should be the armature, and then below that, your actual model should be parented to the armature with the couple of pose bits in there as well. So as long as you've got that, what you want to do is select the model. I'm going to click on Export KCD2 over here. I'm going to go to my modding tools. I'm going to create a folder called test. Inside of that folder, all you do now is click export. You don't necessarily need to change any of these, so there are some times where you might want to do so depending on what you're working with. In this context, they don't matter as such, but when you get in more complex stuff, if you want to play around with, obviously that's where you can see the complex export options around if you want to generate program files, CDF files, etc. But for now, for this one, I'll leave those default as they are. Just need this apply modifiers ticked. And then I don't need to change the name. I'm just going to click save. So export even. If you want to click export, it will take this name over here as the actual name it's going to put for me. So I'm going to click export. Give that a second to do its thing. And whilst it's doing that, I'm going to go to that folder. And it's done, hopefully. Here we are. What you should see in the folder now is generated this mhead Henry skin file. The main thing always to look at when it doesn't export is check the file size. If it's showing like a really small weird size like 123 kilobytes or something like that, it may have failed to export and may be corrupted. I'd always say compare it to the base game file first and see what that came out as if you're unsure. But at least I've got the file there. I know that one's worked, so that's ready for us to then put back in game afterwards. I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the sword. So all I'm going to do for the sword now, in terms of the change to it, I'm just going to take the guard here. Select all, please, 1 second. Got all this. Should be it. Let's just make sure. No, I am missing some. Again. Very random bits in here. Grab all of those. Don't even this pedantic in yours. It's just as I've kind of got an easy example to show to you guys. You can just pick anything of whatever you prefer to kind of make a change to, but I'm just going to commit to doing this one. grab those. So all I'm going to do, now that I've got through most of the guard selected, just double check, okay, see that's the guard. All I'm going to do is just scale this on the y-axis and make it look absolutely ridiculous, so that I know it has made the change. I'm just going to select it again and just do the same on the z-axis. Just again, utterly ridiculous, so I know it's working, but that is the principle of the change I need to make for that. The next thing I need to do before I can export is I need to recreate the geometry, because if I don't do that, these two won't actually do anything at the moment. So all I'm going to do that process is I'm going to select the sword model, go to bcry exporter, and then on the cry utilities over here, there's panel to add physics proxies. So the different types you can choose from for the shape, in terms of it's a box, cylinder, sphere, etc. In this particular case, the way the plugin works, it does give you the type it had. So you can select the type and how many, the names, etc. But it can't at the moment get the data, the size of them, which I'm trying to work on. But for now, you can see that it's a capsule proxy. There's two of them. So I'm going to do the same process of, with the sword selected, I'm going to click to create a capsule. And what it will essentially do, it will create it as an object below the item, which is how it should be. It should not be parented to it, so that's fine. By default, it will create it to the full size of the model. So obviously, because I've made this so ridiculously big, it has scaled it out like that. All I'm going to do to make this easy to work with, I'm just going to grab two side faces, scale this in. So we'll do the first one, and the first proxy should only cover this blade. So I'm going to scale this in on the y-axis a bit more until it kind of covers about just the, so it covers the top of the blade, bottom of the blade, of the sword even, sorry, and doesn't go any further out than it needs to be, essentially. Make that a bit tighter, and if I can nudge that over, I think. But generally, it doesn't need to be perfect. The game does, to be honest, the game fakes a lot of the kind of the collision position, just about gets away with it. That's pretty tight to what it should be. And then that's the first one. The main important detail to have is the names need to be the same as the base game was, because it has a bit of an issue. We can't find the numbers the way it thinks it should. So that's that one. I need to copy the name from there and give this one the same name. Now I'm just going to rename the old one so I can keep the name as it should be. I know that's the old one. I can get rid of the one that's now replaced. And then the second one I'm going to need is the other proxy. So we'll do the same thing of select the model again, do the capsule, and this time I'm just going to scale it. It's all selected. Let's try that again. With the proxy selected, I'm just going to scale this in a lot so that it goes down, move it into that space. It should be mostly quite close on this sort of angle, but just for the sake of getting it right, I'm going to scale it even in a bit tighter, like that. You can see now it's covering full scope of the model. And that's what you want to achieve, is just cover the guard that you're working with, essentially. So I'm going to do the same thing, copy the name, I'm going to pull that to a random name for now, place that one, and that's the two proxies, so I can delete this other one now. And in theory, this is basically the point that you've got collisions recreated, you can go through the last bits to export it. Just for reference, whilst we've got it as well, I suppose I'll show you quickly, there is in GitHub for the tool, for the Blender tool, we do have a couple of template Blender saves to work with for the tools, sword as template. I'll show you it here. So basically in the Blender, in the templates folder of the GitHub for the swords, there is a longsword template. There is only one for longsword at the moment. I'll open this up so you kind of get an idea of what is the perfect structure that you should have for yours. These helpers you can just ignore, but that's like a reference point for the sword you're looking at. So I'll get rid of those for a moment. Basically, inside, this is what your setup should look like in principle on a custom sword. So model, call it whatever you want, and then you do proxies, and you can see the same structure, same sort of overarching setup for them. So if you do get lost on any of the brief bits I showed you on the sword, feel free to compare to this template as well. Or if you want to just use this as a base to where you know you have working collision, that's there as well for that. Just want to show you that quickly. Close that for a minute. Normally, if you've made any changes to the position of stuff, you have to assign the location, data, etc. So apply transforms. Just be careful when you're doing that you're only applying transforms to your model itself. Don't change the position of any of these helpers. If you do that, then it will cause an issue, because they're expected to be in a very specific position for the game engine, and if you assign them a new location, it will just confuse the engine, essentially. So leave those as they are. Like the rotations, they should always be this way, otherwise the game will have it back to front. Proxies and the main model body itself are the only ones you should apply transforms to if you've made changes. So I'm going to do that and just apply all transforms to those so I know that they're set in the correct position. But now that I've done that, got the proxies recreated, the naming convention is as I want it to be, because I'm just replacing the base game sword for now. All I'm going to do is go to my KCD2 toolkit panel and go to the export option again. I'm going to go to the same folder we went to previously, so I'm going to go to my D drive and to find that model test folder in here that I made. In there, and again, don't need to change the name because I'll take it from Blender. So I'm just going to click export to CryEngine. Give that a moment to do its thing. Just pull it here so you can see. Essentially, it creates a DAE at first, but give it a few seconds. When it's done, it will leave with just the CGF at the end. So that's the final exporting working version. Before we go into putting the game, the only thing I'm going to show you briefly is the version of that getting in the loose file, just because there's a couple of caveats in there to work with. So the main thing, really, as with previous getting files, textures, etc., is to just go into the date folder for your game and pick wherever that item is. And so, show you previous videos, I don't go over it again, but you can see the previous videos, the set finder tool, trying to find the item you're looking for. In this particular context, it's a bit easier using the tool, just because if you search on here for Hammerhead Henry, let's say, hover over them, it tells you which pack at least you're looking in to narrow it down. So for skin, it's the exact same process. You just take it out of the pack, and then from loose file, you just direct it to the file you're looking at, so I don't go over that one. The main reason I want to talk about it a little bit is just a caveat for the CGF. There's a little bit of an extra step. So just to get the context quickly, I'm just going to go on here, find the longsword, and the name of it, the pack it's in, is IPL Objects Part 4. So I'm going to go into that. So Objects Part 4, go into there. And then I know the path I'm doing it a bit too much, my source, but essentially it's in Objects, Man-Made, Weapons, and then Swords _ long is where we should be going into, and then you should see there's all the textures, different models, etc. in here. And the mod I'm looking for further down should be longsword _ Henry, and here it is. The main thing to caveat when you're taking these out is you don't just need the CGF, you need to also take this CGFM file. The reason being that they both contain parts of the data that the import needs to work together. So when you use the pack version of the import from Blender, it finds the CGFM alongside of it and will import both of them together, essentially. But if you're doing it yourself directly, you do need to take both of these. So I'm just going to copy those. Just as a quick test, I'm going to go folder here, let's test. Put both those files from here to there. So now I've got those. What I'm going to do, I'll show you kind of both versions and why you need these the way they are. Let me do that. Right. So essentially I'm going to do a plot that out there, and I was going to show you briefly that if you try to import it out, you will get an error, which is why it's so important to make sure you bring the CGFM file. So I'm going to do loose CGF, go to that same folder, and if I select it now as CGF and try to import it, it will give you an import of some kind, but you're missing the model because it only has the data of the actual collision pieces, nothing else. It gets a bit confused. So what you need to do, and the reason you need both of them, is if I now go back into loose test, just get rid of that generated, pop that back in there, and then try it again, and it will actually work this time. Use file, so there's nothing in there. Do the same process, CGF. Now if I click it again, the CGFM is now actually bringing in the material details, the model, all that stuff that goes with it. So just make sure if you are doing loose that you do that process. It's not the same sort of skins is much simpler, it's just the one file, don't have to worry about anything else. But just sort of highlight that if you are doing it manually, make sure you are taking that step. So I know that works, that's fine. We've got both our files now in this folder that I've made. I've exported both the head change we made and the random ridiculous change to the sword as well. So the next thing we now need to do is get both of these back in the game to look at them. So to do that, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to go into my mods folder, and what we're going to do, we're going to use the folder we created in the previous video for textures, just because it's already got the manifest file created, don't need to change anything with it. So if you already got this, then use the same one. All I'm going to do to start off with is delete the previous pack in the objects folder, just because starting from scratch so you get the right structure for them. So what we first need to do is also make sure you have the manifest, which if you're using the previous folder you should have already. If not, look back at the previous video to see how to make the manifest. But once we've got that, the next bit we need to do is, as previous with the textures, we need to find the exact path that these two files should go into in here, so they're actually in the right place. So to do that, for the first one here, I've already got it because I've got the sword open from that previous loose example. So what I'm going to do is try to recreate this same path of inside data, go into objects, man-made, weapons, sword underscore long in there. So we'll do that same process of objects, and then in there the next one is man-made. It is case sensitive sometimes, so just to make sure, just to be certain we follow it in this case, so it's all now location here. So man-made, weapons, and then the last bit in there is swords underscore long. And then now I'm in that path. This is, you can see from here, this is where they have the loose files. The base game does have both CGF and CGFM. We don't need both for our exported version because it kind of combines it together essentially. So what I'm going to do is take the CGF file for the sword we've made, cut that, and put it into this folder. And then we do the same process essentially for the head, which I believe was in IPL characters 0. So I'm going to go back out to my data and find that one. IPL heads, characters, humans, then male for this one. I think he's in. I can't remember. So I'm going to double check. I'm going to go into here and just find out where he was again. IPL underscore heads part 0. So he is in here somewhere. I thought it'd be in Henry, but I think it might be have a separate one further down. Head Henry, I think. Yeah, there we are. So he should be in. This is the correct structure now. You can see the model that we've replaced in there. So I'm going to have to recreate the same objects, characters, humans, male, head, etc. in there in our mod structure. So I'm just going to go into the mods again. Go to our test one. I've already got the objects folder, so I'm just going to go into that, and then also we just need the rest of it. So characters, and then you need humans. And the next one is male. I think it was a males. Yeah, male. And then go to that. Head. And on top of that now, we need head underscore Henry, so that one. And similar with the sword, we just need to drag this skin file we've exported into that folder. And then now we've got both of those there, when we pack it the game will detect this mod and it will overwrite the base game ones we had in there already. So got both of those in the folder we need. We've got the manifest that's valid, so the last bit to do is just to literally go over to here and the mods. That's done, it saves, that's done. Close. And then you should see, if you go back in, you've got the pack file. As long as you've got that, you know you're good to go. So now that's ready, all I'm going to do is I'm going to load up my game, and I will be back with you once my game's loaded, because it might take a minute to do so. Just a quick caveat I've noticed when I was trying to get my game to go up for this one. The model name for the sword, if you're using this example, will have defaulted to the actual data's name, which is long underscore sword underscore Henry underscore mesh, whereas the actual one that is in the game should be long underscore sword underscore Henry, so it shouldn't have the underscore mesh bit in there. So just to kind of reference, what I'm going to do is just very quickly remove that. So it should just be the exact same name as the page in the game, just drop the underscore mesh at the end. Just so I caught us as about to load the game. So I'm just going to repack that, and I will be back again when the game has actually loaded with the correct data. Okay, so back in game now. So just kind of show you the changes. So at the moment I've done, I've got the Henry's sword reforged version equipped. As long as it's any version of the Henry sword, it should work. It'll use the same model as such. So we've got that one, and then you can kind of already see the ears peeking through a little bit through the helmet. So what I'm going to do is really throw off his helmet, get his padding, get rid of all that, and if I go into the game, you can see now he's got a big, massive bump on his head, and his weirdly shaped ears have also gone out a bit there. So you know that from that, the skin change we've made has clearly worked in that process. And then, as you can see, the head guard has changed quite dramatically. I'm going to pull that out. So you can see that change has been made. The sword is still for the usual correct length, all the materials, all that textures, all that's worked. And then just the guard obviously has gone absolutely massive based off that quick size change we made to it. So that's just, like I said, a very quick introduction to finding the asset in the game, all the skin CGF files, the two main types you're going to work with, getting those into Blender, and then going through that process of making some basic changes to them. If you're confident with generally 3D modeling on Blender, etc., that's basic start point to actually make and change any base game models you want to change in the same sort of way. The only caveat really at the moment is certain things like scabbards, etc., they have certain morph issues, so you can't change those, but swords, armor, shields, all that kind of stuff, you can go away and make all these sort of basic changes to them quite easily. Yeah, that's just kind of the starting point, really. Get it out, make a change, put them back into the game in the same way you do with the textures. In future videos, we are going to go into the more complex steps in terms of actually taking an asset that's not already in the game, getting that model into working condition to put it into the game, and then also as part of that as well, we'll have to go through the item XML sort of process, character components, all the steps that the game uses to define like the weapon or armor stats, and the model it uses, like basically the configuration of how the game reads that custom new item essentially. So we'll go through that in the next video. So stay tuned for that, and then after we've done that, we'll kind of go through the actual in-depths of custom style modeling, all the kind of the key caveats, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Henry, let's drink to Henry. He gets the job done the best he can. Yeah!